in just a couple of seconds. Please hang on. Well, good morning or afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Opportunity Zones new for the Brownfields Toolkit webinar. This is a national webinar provided by the 3 Technical Assistance to Brownfields or TAB program providers. I'm Blase Leven at Kansas State University. I'm the TAB programs coordinator here. Erica Rippey with the Center for Creative Land Recycling is actually running this webinar platform that you're connected to. And Colette Santacieri with the New Jersey Institute of Technology provided planning input for this webinar. Next slide, please. Thank you. A few housekeeping items before we get started. All of the attendees are on mute, but you can submit questions using the Q&A function or the chat feature on your meeting console. When you do that, please make sure your questions are set to go to all panelists. A recording of the webinar as well as the slides will be available after the webinar. You'll receive a link as well as a evaluation survey that we'd like you to fill out and return if possible so that we can improve our programming. You can also download the slides right now if you wish through the meeting console as well. As you can look and see that there's a PDF file of the slides. Next slide, please. So today you're going to hear a little bit about the Technical Assistance to Brownfields program, as to include some information we'll be providing on the Opportunity Zone subject that may help you. Then we'll hear about the Opportunity Zones and Funds Initiative and tax incentives by 3 great speakers. We'll then have a Q&A session, and then we'll wrap up. So a little bit about the TAB program. We are a network of planners, environmental, and economic development experts that provide direct technical assistance to local governments, nonprofits, and tribal communities, as well as webinars like this one and workshops and e-tools to assist folks in redeveloping brownfields. Kansas State University is the lead for national TAB efforts as well as tribal technical assistance. And we also focus efforts in EPA regions 5, 6, 7, and 8 on the map here on this slide. The Center for Creative Land Recycling, or CCLEAR, focuses on work in regions in EPA regions 9 and 10 and 2. And NJIT focuses their efforts on EPA regions 1, 3, and 4. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, previous slide. Please take a look at on the slide there, kind of make a mental note of what region you're located in and you work in, and to get our speakers up to speed on kind of who they're going to be talking to, we're going to ask you 3 quick questions. So You should now be seeing the first question, which is, what EPA region do you work in? And if you could, please select one answer with using your mouse. And then we will, after a second or two, we will display the results so the speakers and all of us can see that. Okay, great. Okay, lots of attendees. That's good. Our next question is, how many years have you worked in the land reuse field or brownfields field? Please select an answer. And okay, the less than fives win it. So that's great. Lots of new blood and some experience for sure. And then our last question is, how familiar are you with the Opportunity Zones topic? Please make a selection. And let me say that on the last option, if you're only thinking about creating opportunity funds, go ahead and answer. You don't have to be working with your governor's office. Okay, so good. So the not at alls and a little bit familiar is kind of where most of us are. Thanks, Erica. So this is perfect. Next slide, because we've got three great speakers to tell you about this topic, and it sounds like we're all ready to listen and learn. Andy Seth will start this off. He is the president of Sustainable Strategies DC and a Kansas State University TAB partner, and he actually is the one who came up with the idea of doing this webinar. And he will give an overview of the Opportunity Zone tax incentives. And let me say that I would encourage you to go ahead and look over the bio descriptions here and take note of how distinguished these speakers and experienced these speakers are. Following Andy, Jane Campbell, who is the director of the Washington DC office of the National Development Council, will give a high-level finance and development perspective of Opportunity Zones initiative, and that she's well qualified to do that with her experience with public-private partnerships and financing tools, and also as an elected and appointed official in local government, local, state, and federal government. Following Jane, Maurice Jones, who's the Economic Development Director for the city of Dubuque, Iowa, will talk about a local government's perspective from the standpoint of a city that is looking into designating opportunity zones as well as creating an opportunity fund. Next slide, please. So with that, we'll turn this over to our first speaker, Andy Seth, who will give us that overview of Opportunity Zones tax initiative.
Thanks, Blase. This is Andy Seth with Sustainable Strategies DC. I am happy to be with you today and excited to talk about the Opportunity Zones and to make experts of everyone on the webinar today on this topic. So we're going to learn a lot today. I'm going to go over just real quick the agenda that I will cover, and I'll share with you a little bit about what Maurice and Jane are going to talk about as well. But I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the legislation. I'm going to give you the basics of the Opportunity Zone, and you can go very deep on Opportunity Zone, the topic, but we're going to keep it at a level that I hope that everyone can understand. We'll make the connection to Brownfields. I want to talk and give you some information on, from an investor perspective, what are the tax incentives that they're going to realize. What you're all probably involved in now is the designation of Opportunity Zones. And if you're not, this is the step that is critical right now. It's time sensitive, and you need to get these things designated in your communities to be able to play with these tax incentives. We'll talk about that. Opportunity funds, I'll cover a little bit. Jane's going to talk about that a little bit more, but this is the finance vehicle that puts the money into these projects. And as community officials, what do you need to do? As soon as you hang up from the webinar today, what are your next steps to get involved and to get census tracts designated as opportunity zones? I'm happy to be joined today by my friends Jane Campbell and Maurice Jones, and they're going to come at it from two different perspectives. Jane, the National Development Council, has long experience with both financing and developing projects with and for communities. So she's going to give you that lens to take a look at these tax incentives. And Maurice works with the city of Dubuque. They're going to hopefully have census tracts designated as opportunity zones. They're going to be developing and identifying projects for opportunity zone tax incentives. And they're going even further, that they're looking to help create opportunity funds and make these dollars really begin to flow in Dubuque pretty quickly. So that's going to be a unique perspective from a local government. So a little background on what opportunity zones are. This was a concept developed back in 2015 by the Economic Innovation Group. And their goal was to think about distressed low-income communities. And these places were struggling. They were not seeing the business investment. And what had happened is they weren't on a level playing field before the recession. When the recession came, there was tremendous business loss in communities across the country. And since the recovery has taken off, there has been uneven business growth in these distressed census tracts. So they were looking at a finance tool to help these places with their economic development projects. And there was a bipartisan piece of legislation proposed by Tim Scott from South Carolina, Cory Booker from New Jersey. It was introduced in the House as well by Pat Tiberi from Ohio, Ron Kine from Wisconsin. And when the tax bill that passed at the end of the year began to move, they were able to attach their legislation to the tax bill that got passed December 22nd and signed by President Trump. So if you want to go deep, there is a link here on the legislation, the text, and you can take a look at a lot of details about the opportunity zones. But let's talk about the basics and what these things are. And again, there is not enough state funding, federal funding, local funding to help distressed census tracts turn themselves around. Private investment is critical and absolutely necessary. So that was the intent of the legislation. How do you get that private capital moving into the places that need the investment the most? So that is the goal. And the incentive was two different ways. Tax deferrals, and I'll talk about this in a minute, but how do you put off taxation on capital gains to encourage people to invest in opportunity zone projects? And tax exclusion. How do you help folks avoid taxation on some beneficial projects that benefit low-income communities? And the outcome with these tax incentives, we hope, is that you start to see patient capital, equity investment in distressed projects, and to really help to stabilize neighborhoods and turn these places around. And these projects, they were overlooked previously just because they did not pencil out. With these tax incentives, these are intended to get them across the finish line, to make them look more attractive to investors, and again, to help places that need it most. There is a strong connection between opportunity zones and brownfields for a number of different reasons. And number one is when you're talking about highly distressed census tracts across the country, in many of those census tracts across the country, you find corridors of brownfields, contaminated sites that have sat there, have not gotten the attention that they need. So there is a strong connection, number one, between the places that are eligible for Opportunity Zone designation and where you find a lot of brownfields in this country. These projects, as I mentioned, they have some difficulty because of those contamination costs. So they often don't get off the dime because as investors look at them, they see them as too risky, not high enough a reward. So the tax incentives are going to help balance that equation out for brownfields. As investors do look at this, they're looking at the upside of these Opportunity Zone projects, and brownfields could provide a lot of upside in that the values of these properties are distressed, they're low, and with cleanup, these values are going to grow. So as investors are looking at the backside of these deals, if they can make them pencil out, they're going to realize that the taxes that they can exclude on their Opportunity Zone investments are likely to be very attractive with brownfields. And brownfield costs are going to be eligible. This is a part of development, and we're certainly going to work with IRS as they put together the guidelines for the program, but brownfields are going to be right there in the mix. So let me walk you through what the tax incentives are, and I hope to help you make sense of how someone's going to benefit by this. So number one is the temporary tax deferral. And what this means is if you've made a windfall on Wall Street and you've got capital gains that are subject to taxation today in 2018, what an Opportunity Zone investment provides you is an opportunity for investors to defer and minimize the taxation on those original capital gains. So let me give you an example. If you invest in an Opportunity Zone, what the legislation provides, and let's say you hold that investment for 10 years, you will defer those taxes until December 31st, 2026. If you hold it less than that, if you hold it less in particular, you pay those taxes when you sell that asset. So from whenever you put your money into an Opportunity Zone project until either you pull it out or December 31st, 2016, whatever comes first, you get to defer those taxes on the capital gains of that original investment. So that's benefit number one. And that is, the real-time value of money, that should make these investments attractive to investors. Benefit number two is what's called a step up in basis. So what that means is the longer that you hold onto an Opportunity Zone investment, the fewer taxes you'll pay on your original capital gains. So again, if you were killing it on Wall Street and you had a lot of capital gains to pay on that original capital gains, after 5 years, if you hold your money into that Opportunity Zone investment, you'll pay 10% less on those original capital gains. And if you hold it for 7 years or longer, you'll pay 15% less on those original capital gains. So fewer taxes on the original capital gains that you owed Uncle Sam is the second inducement to attract investment in Opportunity Zone projects. The third benefit is equally attractive, and this is a permanent exclusion from taxation of any gains realized on the Opportunity Zone investment in itself if you hold that investment for at least 10 years. So let's say you invest in an Opportunity Zone project. This is a mixed use housing project. You hold that, you double that value of that project in 10 years. When you sell that asset, your equity asset in that project, you pay no capital gains taxes. So again, that's 1, 2, 3 different tax benefits that folks will realize from from these investments. And I'll give you just a real quick example so you understand it all together. I've got the example of Mr. Monopoly. He realizes $1 million in capital gains that he's going to have to pay taxes on when he sells some stock. He puts that $1 million into an opportunity fund, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. That's the vehicle that you make investments into opportunity zone projects, and they're gonna fund a housing project, and he holds that investment in that housing project for 10 years. So when he sold that stock and put it into the opportunity fund, he's going to defer any capital gains on that initial $1 million until 2026. Since he is holding that investment for 10 years, he's not going to pay taxes on the $1 million that he originally made. He's going to pay 15% less. So he's going to pay taxes on $850,000. And the housing project that he actually invested in, its value grew. So he will pay no taxes when he pulls his money out of that investment. So I hope that helps you see that this does provide some key incentives for folks to invest in distressed projects. What is happening now is opportunity zone designations across the states. The governors have the opportunity to make some choices where they can designate opportunity zones. So nationally, there are 8,000 tracts. I'm not sure why, but the slides seem to be flipping around a little bit. But there are about 8,000 tracts that could be designated as opportunity zones. And depending on your state, the number of tracts could be in the dozens or the hundreds. There are certain tracts that qualify. Each state has a certain number of tracts, census tracts, that they can put forward to the Treasury Department as consideration as opportunity zones. And the governors, there's a certain number of eligible census tracts in their states. They are eligible to nominate, to designate 25% of those tracts. We'll show you some maps in a little bit of what tracts do qualify, but some links to some maps. But by and large, you have to meet one of 3 criteria. And the slides, sorry, keep slipping, but the criteria are either 20% poverty in a census tract. For a rural area, your family median income in that census tract has to be 80% or less than the statewide family income. And for a metropolitan area, again, it's got to be 80% of either the statewide or the metropolitan family income. So those are the census tracts that are in play. There's some limited opportunity for contiguous census tracts to those that qualify. And if you want to create a corridor that makes sense in your community, and you've got a census tract that's next to an eligible census tract, as long as that contiguous census tract can't exceed 125% of the median income of that qualifying census tract, you might be able to pull in that contiguous census tract into your opportunity zone designation as well. Don't worry, there's maps, there's lists of which census tracts do exist and are eligible for consideration. One of those links I have listed here, and these slides are going to be available to download. And Jane's got a different link that is a little bit more user-friendly, but this is the one that Treasury put out, so I provide this here. Governors are under a tight timeline. They've got until March 21st, according to the legislation, to designate their census tracts. The legislation also allows governors to seek a 30-day extension. So some states are taking advantage of that, and their deadline will be April 20th. So you need to figure out where your state falls and where your deadline is. 30 days after that deadline, whichever it is, the Secretary of the Treasury will designate, or he will approve the designations of your governor. Governors have a lot of discretion on designating opportunity zones, and the processes run the gamut in the 50 states, from governors soliciting no input to very formal application procedures. So the first step is figuring out what your state is doing. And even if you've got a governor who isn't seeking input from communities, you should still be very active and vocal trying to get your census tracts considered. And we'll give you some ideas later. It's also helpful to look at this process through the lens of your governor's eyes. And what smart governors are going to do is they're going to choose places that ultimately will attract investors. So remember that these opportunity zone projects will need to compete locally, regionally, and nationally for investors. So the governors are going to seek to designate census tracts with strong economic potential, and they're going to gauge that by just looking at what kind of activity is already happening in your neighborhoods. So some criteria that the governors will take a look at as they are making their census tract considerations. One is, are there corridors or contiguous clusters of census tracts that make sense? That's going to enable, very clear marketing of properties in close-knit areas. Again, existing activity, are there efforts underway, planned, ready to go, that these opportunity zone projects could take off pretty quickly? They're going to look at what else is going on with either designations or investments in particular census tracts. So if you've got a lot of new market tax credit activity, if you've been designated a HUD empowerment zone, if you've received Tiger funding, if you've got a lot of brownfield activity, and you've got sites that are already being assessed and heading toward development, you need to brag about those activities. And as well, they're going to be looking at layoffs, closures, and relocations, those places that really need the help. We could go back a couple of slides. Opportunity funds are something that need to be established for opportunity zone development and investment in communities. So Jane will speak more about that, but these are investment vehicles that will be organized, certified, and these are the places where folks will get investors interested in their investments. And these are going to happen at the local, state, and national levels. So the IRS is going to provide more guidance on opportunity funds. So, but it's not too early to begin conversations with interested financial partners to consider interest in creating an opportunity fund. And the governors are likely going to be impressed by communities that do indicate that they have opportunity funds in the making. And Erica, if you could flip back just a few slides. On the next steps. My last slide is next steps for what you need to be doing right now to get yourself positioned for opportunity zone investment. One is figuring out what's happening in your state. There is a process that is happening. It's happening pretty quickly, and you need to insert yourself into that process and figure out what your governor wants. Second is to reach out to developers. They need to be involved. You need to know what projects are near kicking off, where there are some funding gaps, and where there could be a use for equity investment. And sharing that information with your state governors is going to be critical to getting designated as opportunity zones. You need to put forward the letters, the application packages, whatever is needed by your governor. They'll have deadlines if there are formal processes, so you need to be respectful of that. Again, I mentioned start an opportunity fund discussion in your community and share that information. Governors are going to be interested at cities, regions that want to create these. And last, you need to advocate for these. Get your state delegates, get your county commissioners, get your mayor, get everybody pointing at the governor and making the case why these opportunity zone designations are going to be important to your community. So just in closing, these are an important new economic development tool, but you need to be at the table. So only if you're designated as an opportunity zone can you take advantage of these tax incentives. And they will provide some benefits to distressed communities, what everybody wants to see. Moreover, opportunity zone designation is going to help you compete for other funds. So you're going to find that the federal government is going to want to invest in these places with infrastructure dollars, likely with brownfield dollars. So this can provide other opportunities as well. So think carefully about your census tracts, figure out where your economic future is, and really begin to make your case with your governor. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jane for a finance perspective. And let me just remind folks that Jane's worn a lot of hats. She was the former mayor of Cleveland. Now she's the director of the National Development Council's DC office. And again, NDC helps communities across the country with public-private partnerships that finance capital projects, that help develop these projects. So I'm particularly interested in her thoughts on the opportunity zones. So Jane, take it away.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you so much for your presentation. It's a privilege to be part of this conversation because the challenge now is to make the Opportunity Zone program really work for communities. So let's look at the next slide just for a quick review of where this came from. Erica, there. A bit of this will reaffirm some of the things that Andy said, but given what our earlier poll of the level of experience with this program, I'm not too concerned about kind of reaffirming the story. The tax bill, Tax Cuts and Job Act, as it was called, incorporated the Investment and Opportunity Act, which, as Andy said, was a bill that was put together by Senator Cory Booker and Senator Tim Scott, a Republican and Democrat working in companionship to try to move something forward. So now we're in a situation where the federal government has to develop the parameters for how the program's going to function. First step, you see the picture. This is the governor of Ohio. You all know I'm from Ohio. The state governors are going to draw the opportunity zone maps and submit them to the CDFI fund. Meanwhile, IRS is already working on the regulations for the creation of opportunity funds. And that is something that is under development as we see, and then it flows to the bottom, which is the deployment of the funds into the opportunity zone. So look at the next slide, and you'll see, as Andy left you with what is your job, right now your job between now and March 21st or April 20th, if your state extends it, it is absolutely time to advocate. Advocate with governors, advocate with members of Congress, advocate with your business community. And the real issue that we're seeing emerge more and more is because only 25% of the potentially eligible zones can be designated as opportunity zones, the trick is to show why those particular census tracts are really going to create investment. Because there's other activity going on, because there's been a new markets project, because there's been an empowerment zone, because there's brownfield remediation investment, because there's a workforce development program that's related to recent layoffs. You want to tell the story about why is this particular census tract primed for investment. So look at the next slide. What kind of projects? This is one of the questions we've had. So what kind of projects does this make sense for? Remember that the opportunity zone is a tax incentive for investors It is not awarded to individual companies. And you may have heard a lot of conversation about what are called unrealized capital gains. The stock market has been particularly strong. And so the capital gains is if you bought a stock for $100 and it's now valued at $500, if you sell that stock, you have to pay what's called capital gains tax on the $400 increase in value of that stock. And so what happens is a lot of people simply don't sell their stock, and it just continues to add value, but the value only goes to the individual stockholder. It doesn't go to the community as a whole. So this program is designed to allow for a way for these, what they call unrealized capital gains, to become investments in communities in the opportunity zones. So that's just a perspective to understand about how this program was developed. It's trying to bring some of that private money that is sitting in the wealth creation vehicles for individuals who have wealth out of those vehicles and into the community. So the projects are potentially eligible are new businesses and projects. The incentive is market-based. And so the investors are going to determine how large or small their investment is made based on whether they believe there's going to be an investable opportunity that is going to give them some return on their investment. And it's also important to understand that this is not just capital, but we are also looking at, as this program develops, state and localities will still be in making the complementary investments, whether that's infrastructure or whether that is, establishing transit, something else in order to make this really work. So look at the next slide. And you can see that there are three types of business property that is eligible for investment. Stock of a qualified opportunity zone corporation. That's a corporation that is located in the opportunity zone. Interest in a qualified opportunity zone partnership. So it doesn't have to be a corporation, it can be a partnership. Or tangible property that is used in the opportunity zones. They now call these O fund investments. Some people call them Oz. So you'll hear a lot of lingo. This is such a new program that you don't have the acronyms really work out. But if the original use is not something that would qualify, the property has to be substantially improved in order to qualify. So what that means is there's an enormous amount of investment opportunities. It can be high growth startups, it can be Main Street businesses, it can be real estate, it can be manufacturing facilities, brownfields, entrepreneurship and incubators, accelerators, co-work space, rental housing, affordable housing, and so much more. There is a specific exclusion for what are called sin businesses. That would be massage parlors, tattoo parlors, and casinos. So those of you who are planning that will have to look elsewhere. Look to the next slide. And we'll see the creation of these opportunity zones timeline. You can just see, as Andy said, the Treasury issued its guidance on the designation on February 8th. Here's what the governors have to do. I think we've pretty much covered this. So let's move on to the next slide, where this is the alternative map. As you can see from this, this is a very complicated mapping process. If if you've worked with new markets tax credits and you know the census tracts that are new markets eligible, it's the same census tract. And you can see the map, and this is an interactive map that you can use. You'll see that minorities represent over half the population in distressed communities. Counties with under 100,000 people are 11 times more likely to be economically distressed. And the rate of new business formation in rural areas has fallen more than twice as fast as it has at the national level. So this is a program really designed to bring capital into communities that it otherwise might not be inclined to go into. So let's look at the next slide, given who our audience is. This is the Brownfields assistance. The case for Brownfields is perfect for this kind of investment because brownfield redevelopment is very costly, often more expensive than new construction, and without incentives, a brownfield reinvestment just doesn't pencil out. Opportunity zones can create a new investment resource that can be added to the arsenal of federal investment toolkits that the communities can utilize. When I was mayor of Cleveland, and we tried to put together investment packages, we used to call them baklava because it took so many layers of financing to redevelop a property that had been distressed because there'd been an investment, the company had left, someone had come in and taken all the everything that was of value, and you might have asbestos, you might have all manner and sorts of underground storage tanks. Those of you in the field can imagine all the different things. And so this is a new opportunity. The opportunity zones, as it is intended in the legislation, can be leveraged with the whole panoply of existing investment tools. This is really important because many of the federal programs, as they've been developed, have had prohibitions against using one kind of federal fund to support another federal investment. And this particular program has none of those problems. And so it allows the most creativity to use, for example, a new markets tax credit with a low-income housing tax credit for affordable housing. And the local communities may provide tax increment financing. And you may end up with an EPA grant for brownfield remediation. You can put all of those pieces into the development. And that's what can change something from the first picture to the second picture. So move to the next slide. And this reaffirms this. The reason I point this out is how important it is that the Treasury guidance will allow that investments, go back to that slide, we're going to repeat it, do allow the programs to overlap. And the reason I say that over again is because it is different than the way the federal government has operated before. So now the question is, what's an opportunity fund? And the amount of questions people have asked me that I don't have answers for are a lot more than the amount of questions I do have answers for. But let me tell you what we do know is that qualified opportunity funds are defined in the law as an investment vehicle organized as a partnership or a corporation for the purpose of investing in qualified opportunity zone property. By law, the Opportunity Fund must make 90% of its investments in the Opportunity Zone. In order to qualify as an Opportunity Fund, the fund has to be certified by the IRS, which is a division of Treasury. Treasury has not yet issued guidance on what it takes to be certified. And so there are lots of questions about who can create a fund, how big will the fund be, and those kind of issues. President Trump last week was in Cincinnati, and he spoke there with an oblique reference to the Opportunity Fund as one of the things that are fabulous in the tax reform, tax cut bill. And we can go to the next slide. So you can see the timeline and open questions. Treasury did put forth what they call an updated priority guidance plan, which if you get this, you can click through and see there are many, many pages of all the priority guidance that they're going to issue, which they've outlined that they intend to issue by June 30th. Honestly, I believe that their top priority is the guidance for the tax cut portion of the tax reform bill. I work a lot with small businesses because NDC has a small business lending component. And one of the really interesting issues in the tax reform bill is that for the first time, subchapter S corporations, partnerships, and non-traditional corporations, which is how many small businesses are organized, are going to be able to be treated more like businesses and less like on your individual taxes. And there are so many conflicting interpretations about how that's going to be done, what it means if you're a consultant, if you're this kind of person, that kind of person. So there are lines around the block with Treasury trying to figure that out. So our concern is that we want to make sure that this issue stays priority on Treasury's list to issue the rules, because while we can work very hard to get the opportunity zones created, there won't be any real investment until there is a certified fund. And the funds can't be certified until there are rules. So Treasury now has said the rules should be forthcoming by June 30th. They have not indicated whether those rules will be final or whether they will be open for comment. Customarily, they're open for a comment period for 30 or 60 days, and that's just a question we don't know for sure. So some of the questions that people have asked me is, what's the minimum size of the fund? Can we do it for our local region? Can we do a fund of 2 million, 10 million? How big do they have to be? Is there a geographic reach? How many funds can be certified? What is the fiduciary responsibility of the fund manager? Are there limits to how much the fund manager can earn by managing the funds? Will there be requirements for the impact on the community served? For example, some of the CDFI investments have a job creation measure. Now, the writers of the legislation have basically said their perspective is let 1,000 flowers bloom. They want to see as light a hand in regulation from the federal government as possible. Their strong thing is 90% of the investments absolutely must be made in the opportunity zone, but they would like to see the private sector drive this. And so this is going to be interesting as we look at the last slide, or the second to last slide. How will the investment decisions be made? We are unable to be sure until Treasury issues the rules. The investors will be looking for a rate of return on equity, high growth business, transformative real estate investments, brownfields that are valued low and remediation increases the value are perfect. So all of this shows that if you have a clear community plan and other investment incentives, you're going to win the day. And so I am turning it over to someone who knows how to win the day, and that is Maurice Jones, who is the man from the Masterpiece on the Mississippi, the city of Dubuque, Iowa. Here we go,
Professor
Maurice.
Jane, thank you.
Switch the slide so we can see. There he is.
Hi, I'm Maurice Jones. I'm the Economic Development Director for the City of Dubuque. As Jane mentioned, our tagline is Masterpiece on the Mississippi. Jumped ahead a little too far. Sorry about that. Well, let's see if I can go back here. Just a little brief history about Dubuque itself. It's the oldest city in Iowa, approximately 60,000 people, just over. Located, of course, on the Mississippi River. So formerly a fur trading post, a lot of lead mining, manufacturing centers, meat packing hub, and we have significant brownfield contamination specifically along the river. We look at our economic challenge that we're facing right now. It's really geared towards workforce. Now, we have a 2.4% unemployment rate. But if you look at the chart on the right, you'll see that our working age population continues to go down. At the same time, employment opportunities go up. So at some point, those two lines are going to intersect. And so as we look at what our challenges are, it's about how do we attract people to our area? How do we continue to make sure that housing is available, as well as the employment side of things. Last Friday, Governor Reynolds and Lieutenant Governor Gregg announced an application process. This was a formal process that would allow us to look at opportunity zones and low-income areas. And I think what it did for us, it allowed us to really jump into action mode very quickly. We looked at what the state's anticipated process. We looked at their timeline. And one key factor was 239 eligible census tracts exist in Iowa. And if you break down the numbers, that means that there's going to be 60 that will be actually designated. So it's very competitive. Additionally, you can see the timelines are extremely tight. And so what we wanted to do was make sure that we presented some really good opportunities. First thing we had to do was, what were the criteria used to review the Iowa application? So understanding exactly what the state was looking for with respect to the opportunity zones was critical for us. And we found out that it's community vision, economic hardships, past successes, average unemployment rate, and of course, communities planning for awarded opportunity zones of designations. So what we wanted to really begin to look at is identifying those zones very specifically. They matched up extremely well with new market tax credits. That's something that we've done quite a bit here in Dubuque. And we look at that 20% or greater. Family income is less than 80%. We were able to line that up very well. And what we did was really begin to look at our urban renewal areas, specifically targeting slum and blight. We felt that that was going to be a key focal point for us and would match up very well with what the opportunity zones represented as far as some of the criteria. So by looking at our urban renewal areas very specifically, we had noticed that we had some projects that we considered catalyst projects. These were projects that are already underway or had some potential to be underway, just were short of some gap financing. So we've been working with developers about their specific areas and what they were trying to accomplish, trying to identify very specifically these projects that we thought could have an impact in our overall mission from a city perspective. But we also wanted to be a little proactive with respect to creating opportunity zones, the funding mechanism. You know, the O Fund for us, we wanted to use as a way to attract local patient capital. A lot of times there's high value individuals who have some serious wealth that are sitting on the sidelines. We wanted to give them an opportunity to participate and show that there was an opportunity for them to invest in their own community. As I said, one of the things we were able to do is kind of look at our current urban renewal areas. We currently use tax increment finance. It's probably the best and only tool that we have here in Iowa. but we also lined it up with the urban revitalization, or we have downtown rehabilitation grant programs and other housing incentives, and kind of looked along those corridors very specifically for some really attractive programs and some attractive projects. Again, it was about meeting with developers, having a conversation about next steps, seeing what their interests were, and they're going to be part of a team to make this happen. And so getting their feedback as to where they're located, what they're doing, and how we could maybe help fill the gaps based on this new information that's come down the pipe. So you see there, immediately we went into action mode, and we identified a really good core group of very impactful projects, from everything from redevelopment of a 33-acre site to a medical campus. And we continue to see which one is, from a high value standpoint, makes the most sense for us to really look at how we can really invest in and what would be really attractive from an investor standpoint. Now, this is a model for us that we've actually used before with respect to brownfields. As I mentioned earlier, sitting on the Mississippi and for previous use, we've had a number of brownfield areas along the Mississippi River. And one of the things that we wanted to do very heavily was to bring our citizens back to the river and create opportunities from a variety of just not recreational, but also higher purposes. And so there's a 90-acre campus on our former brownfield site that you see there in the picture that we've actually redeveloped and leveraged over $400 million in public-private investment. This is what the site looked like previously. You can see it's very attractive. It makes you really want to go out boating. This is what it is today. And that investment was really trying to, again, shake loose patient capital, get our local businesses who were interested in, again, creating something different for the community and showing how they could leverage that to something extremely positive for the community. One of the things you can see here is just encouraging that development, reusing that brownfield for that purpose, and creating that type of environment that made sense for us. One of our local businesses decided to, rather than go elsewhere, located their corporate headquarters here in the riverfront. We also have an opportunity in Historic Millwork District. That's a revitalization of over 28 buildings that covers about 17 city blocks. Now, that we've leveraged in the last 10 years to about $200 million in public-private investment. We continue to work there. It's become a transportation hub, and there's brownfield opportunities to continue growth there as well. We've worked very heavily with the EPA and other layered financing, both state and national, in order to create some opportunities for housing as well as commercial and retail. The Southport concept is a 33-acre site. Now, this one we just recently received an EPA area-wide plan on, and this was, again, it's about creating opportunity to recapture the riverfront for our citizens, and we see it as an investment opportunity for a larger group. So we think this is going to be one of the primary areas that we look at for redevelopment, and as well as creating interest from private investors, as well as getting us to address some of the public infrastructure issues that we have along that corridor. Keys to success, identifying other potential investment sites. We do that on a regular basis. It's an everyday process. We're creating a marketing strategy around various projects so that we can, again, attract that patient capital back into the market. And setting up our own local opportunity fund. I think that's going to be critical for us if we're going to really be successful and be one of those 60 areas designated as a zone itself. Planning, planning, planning. I can't stress this enough. It's one of the things that we do on a regular basis with respect to not just where we are today, but where we want to be in the future, and connecting everything that we do back to our overall master plan of the city itself. What this does is it shows that we have forethought into investment as from public side, but also from a private side. There's a strategy there. And of course, relationships at all levels. We continue to work with the state and trying to demonstrate that we can be successful at what we've done in the past, but also tying it into future projects as we go forward. There you go. Thank you. And I'll turn this over to Blase.
Thanks, Maurice, and thanks, Andy and Jane. Excellent presentations. At this point, we wanted to take chat questions. And unless my meeting console is not functioning correctly, I don't see any questions. that have been entered. So I kind of want to double check with the other panelists and Erica and make sure, see if they see any questions, and encourage attendees that if you have questions, you go ahead and type some to us, and make sure you're sending them to the organizers and panelists, I believe is what we wanted you to send the questions to. Maybe, oh, go ahead, Andy.
Just a reminder to do that. There is a chat feature on your side panel of your webinar. If you type in your question there, and again, select all panelists, that is how you can ask questions.
Great.
Okay, we have a question here, which is, please explain why delaying the taxing of profit is a good thing. Let me first say, a good thing is probably a value judgment. Let me tell you why it is why it's economically advantageous for an investor, because there's a time value of money. So if you don't have to pay the capital gains tax today, but you pay it in 10 years, that money in 10 years is going to be worth less than it is today. So the tax paid will be less. The other component of this is when Andy described the basis is reduced. I gave you my example about the $100 stock you bought that you have in your portfolio at $500, and you've been allowing it to sit there, and so you have $400 in what they call unrealized capital gains. With this program, if you decide that you're going to invest in a community, you can sell that $100 stock you bought for $100 for $500, and you owe capital gains tax on the $400 gain. Capital gains tax is just under 25%. I'm going to use 25% because I can do the math. So you owe $100 in capital gains tax in this year, but you don't pay it for 10 years. So that $100 is going to be worth less. Also, because you held it for 10 years, your basis can be reduced by 15%. And so what that means is that you don't actually have to pay on the full $400, because they determined that instead of you get basically, it's complicated math, but essentially think of it as a 15% reduction on that $100 that you have to earn. So it's only $85. So it's an advantage to the investor, and this program is designed to try to get investors, wealthy people, to invest their money in opportunity zones.
And this is Andy, just building on one thing that Jane said. It's exactly that. This is oftentimes money that would just sit there in the stock market and would not get pulled out of the stock market. What this is encouraging folks to do is to pull that money out and to put it in their communities. So it's an inducement to do a public good.
Andy, there's some other ones in there that's got your name on it, like one regarding can tribes possibly take advantage of this? Any word on that?
So it is census tracts. So any eligible census tract can be designated. So tribes should definitely work, and they are eligible, work with their governor, the state governors, to designate their particular tracts. I saw another question in here as well, a key question of whether or not this is a one-time designation or if multiple designations will be made over time. This is a one-time designation. So if you're in, you're in, and if you're out, you're out. So you need to really pay attention to the March deadline and figure out if your governor is going to meet that early deadline. He's going to make some choices. I don't think the Department of Treasury is going to second guess a lot of governors' choices. And once they get made, they are the opportunity zones. And if you're not in that mix, you do not get to play in this program. So this is it.
And okay, and Andy also.
Here's another.
Go
Another
ahead.
question that I saw asked is, I used the example about stock market, and someone asked, what about gains from real estate? Anything that that generates a capital gains tax, a capital gains obligation, works for this.
Great. Also, a
And
quick question about whether these are, apply to federal taxes or local as well. And I think it's applies to, federal tax, correct?
That's right.
it applies to federal taxes, but many local taxes build off your federal taxes.
Right.
So,
Right. Gotcha.
There were
Okay.
a couple of questions I saw on mapping and figuring out which census tracts are in eligibility. I provided a link, Jane provided a link, and you can also Google Opportunity Zone maps. There are other maps out there. But if you go to one of those maps, type in your city, what most of the maps do is color code those census tracts by eligibility. And again, this eligibility mirrors the new market tax credit eligibility. So it's known, and they're looking at a certain year of Census Bureau information to figure out your eligibility. But these maps, these online tools are very helpful in helping you figure out what's in play and what's not in play.
Thanks. Quick question on how important is it to have active community development financing institutions in place? There's very few in a particular state. Does that put them at a disadvantage? Just curious, I guess, on.
well, let me tell you, every state gets the opportunity to designate opportunity zones. And so having active CDFI may help you to have one zone, one census tract versus another be designated. But if your entire state has very few, then you're not going to be in an adverse situation as compared to another state that has a multiplicity of CDFIs. So I think CDFIs are an incredibly strong tool and agent for community development finance, but they're not the only tool in the toolkit.
Blase, I saw a question here, and just to pull Maurice into that, a couple of questions on the Opportunity Fund conversation that you are engaging in your community. And can you talk a little bit more about what you think that will look like and who you think the players might be?
Oh, absolutely. Not that CRA is something that we have a problem with, but we begin to have conversations with our local banks in particular and other financial institutions who have expressed an interest in investing in low-mod areas very specifically. We've worked with them on new market tax credit projects before, and so there's several layers there. We've operated with CDBG and other kinds of financing opportunities as well as tax increment financing. So we've engaged them in other projects, and so we have basically brought them around the table, asked them about participating and get their interest in setting a fund up. So those are the conversations we're having right now. Additionally, we're talking with developers at the same table to make sure that we're all on the same page about expectations, so we can make sure that we monitor that and we can also manage those expectations with what the fund can do and what it will be used for.
Thanks, Maurice.
I saw another question here just about the 25% and whether or not this is of a state's census tracts or of the nation. And the answer is very directly the state's. So if your state has 100 eligible census tracts that meet the criteria, your governor can only designate 25 of those census tracts. So every state is capped at a certain number of census tracts that they can put forward to the Treasury Secretary. So you are competing against communities in your state for these designations.
Exactly. Iowa has 239 tracts that are low mod, and so we're competing with 60. I mean, that's the number.
And it sounds like one tract counts as one, tract towards this, that you can't, if they happen to be contiguous eligible tracts, it wouldn't count as one overall tract. It would be, say, 3 tracts that are contiguous, correct? There's a question about that.
Yeah, your governor is looking at every individual census tract, and if he puts forward a census tract, that counts against him.
Gotcha.
He is looking to potentially.
And only 5% of the census tracts designated can be in that contiguous category.
Yeah, so very, very few of those.
Just to use your number, there's 100 eligible census tracts. 25 can be designated. Of the 25 that are designated, only 5% of that 25 can be contiguous.
Great.
And they count in your 25.
Yep.
And we have kind of a 2-part question at the end. Are only capital gains from the stock market eligible, or how about gains from other things such as real estate? That's one of the 2 questions. Anybody know?
Anything that generates a capital gains tax obligation is eligible.
Okay.
So
I've got a question.
It does. Go ahead.
Maurice and Jane, from a local perspective, if you're developing a project in a designated tract and you are looking to set up an opportunity fund in your local area, who should you be thinking about as investors? How would you approach a strategy like that?
I would, if I was doing it, I would, and we actually are having these conversations. We're talking with some of our financial institution partners. Some of the foundation partners that are looking at impact investing have been looking at opportunity zone funds as a way to provide an additional resource for their opportunity fund investment with some of their large donors. So I think there's also, in some communities, there is a public-private partnership that works on economic development investment. In Cleveland, it's called the Greater Cleveland Partnership. Other places, it has different names in terms of an economic development financing mechanism that they may be able to help to generate this. And this is something that there are a lot of unknown questions. And the more imaginative people can be, the more attractive to investors this component can be. I think there's one other important question someone asked, which is that, does someone have to own the property in order to be eligible for an opportunity zone fund investment? Again, this is something we can't be 100% sure because Treasury hasn't issued guidance, but the law itself allows that purchasing stock in a business that's located in the opportunity zone is qualified. And there's nothing that speaks to whether that business has to own the property in which they operate. They could lease the property or own it. It's just a matter of they have to be located there. So it would potentially be a problem if you moved out of the opportunity zone. But as long as you're located in the opportunity zone, whether the property is leased or owned is irrelevant as I understand it.
Yeah, and I would just add that in addition to that, with the financial institutions, of course, like I said, we're hitting those as being extreme partners in this, but also we have a community foundation as well, and their donors have partnered in the past on a variety of projects as well. So we see this as an opportunity to tap that market, but then even a step further, we have local industry that also has various foundations that we're also touching base with, and we're just trying to, again, market this in a way as not just looking at the rate of of return on your investment, but also looking at the impact it'll have on your community. So it's one of the things that we're looking at from a marketing perspective, trying to tie into really attacking some of the issues that we have in some of these areas, and setting up a fund that will begin to, move the needle on some of these issues.
And Maurice, just a question here, and I think we've got a lot of local government folks on the call. From a city perspective, is the city role in an opportunity fund more support, marketing, pushing people into it? Or do you see Dubuque and or other cities actually administering opportunity funds?
We're not going to be involved in the administration. I think that would make it more complex than necessary. I think our role is going to be to bring the necessary parties to the table, be the cheerleader to the state, but also trying to augment some of the issues that are there. Just kind of shine on the light on exactly, where there are opportunities, have the conversations. More or less, we see ourselves as the bridge to various connecting points here. So that's how we're going to approach it. It's been successful for us when we look at the work we did in the Southport. That's how we were successful with that project. Able to leveraging those funds, it was about being the bridge to layers of financing to developers, and then also making sure that the community understood the process and what was going on. That's another key factor, is making sure that we had some community engagement so that the process is explained and it's transparent. So that's kind of what our role would be in this endeavor.
Well, thanks, everyone. And that's a great note to end on, because Maurice, you just kind of articulated, I think, what local governments and nonprofits do in fostering, brownfields redevelopment. So that's a perfect segue, I think, for us to go ahead and wrap up, unless there's any other important points Andy, Jane, or Maurice you'd like to make.
No, I really appreciate everyone's attention, and we're happy to provide as much information as we can as this transpires, and perhaps we should, think about reconvening when the Treasury issues its rules.
And if we could have the next slide, Erica. Go ahead, though, Andy.
I would just say that this is an important opportunity, folks. For folks, your clocks are ticking. So when you hang up, again, that first step is getting involved in your state process, figuring out what that state process is, and providing everything you need to make your case that your census tracts should be in that mix of designated opportunity zones. Again, there's going to be a finite list. You need to be on it. And if you're on it, then the opportunities come after that.
I would just say to thank everyone for participating, and have my contact information for something I can do. We can maybe touch base and brainstorm on some ideas as we go through this. I'd be more than willing to work with anyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Maurice. And again, Andy and Jane, and to kind of help with, information flow on what's being learned as we all kind of muddle through and muddle forward. Tab will be posting, some limited but hopefully useful information about what's been learned about designating opportunity zones, what we know about that in different states, kind of as folks like Andy and help folks figure that out as part of their practice. So check back, say midweek next week. We'll be posting what we know by state. And also, if you have other types of technical assistance requests about that or other things, you're always welcome to contact your regional tab provider, which the contact information is on the next slide. So you could advance to the next slide, please, Erica. And we wish you luck with this. Really, really appreciate the speakers helping inform us, and Andy for coming up with the idea to do this webinar, and all of the attendees for your time as well. Good showing, which means it's an important topic. So we're glad we were able to spend some time together today. With that, I think we will be adjourned. Thanks and good luck, everyone.
Thank you.